So gaming on a budget has become difficult these past 2 years. Now here we are in 2022, and we're all still trying to do it. Still game on the budget. The graphics card market is really what's hurting us on this, just because scalpers and shortage and all that stuff. And yes, the predictions of end of 2022 to 2023 that plants will be available for more production and all that stuff. But even then, we're still gonna have to wait. Now, about 3 years ago, before this world situation, I started my whole side business building budget computers. The first computer I remember building was a $300 budget gaming computer. A lady came up to me and says, "Hey, my son wants to game. He wants to get into a little streaming." And I remember that I was able to score, of course, an Optiplex. No, it was a Lenovo. I was able to score a Lenovo. It was an i5 4th gen for a pretty reasonable price. I think it was like $30. I popped in a power supply, a little extra memory on it, and I was able to get a RX 570. Back when we can get RX 570s for $80. And for $160 I was into it. I sold the computer for $300. And that's what started it. Word of mouth was that I was able to build these budget computers for $300. People were able to do some light streaming, some basic gaming, and really have a good time. And that first year, I made pretty good money doing that. And I was able to do that all day long. Every computer that I made, I was usually able to at least double my profits. But fast forward to the current situation, GPU scalping and mining and Ethereum and all that jazz. The graphics card costs more than the computer half the time. Yes, I could probably score myself a complete computer for about $40, $50, and even that has gone up. But then the graphics card is usually going to cost us about $200, $300. So it's been quite difficult unless you're able to scour the eBay or the Facebook Marketplace and scoop up some of those deals that come up. So what are our options? Well, I mean, the obvious one is buy a graphics card. Just pay what they cost. I mean, pay, $2,000 for a 3080 when it's only worth like $700 MSRP, if I believe. Pay $300-$400 for a RX 570, which I've seen those go, and even the 970 is going for $200. One of the champions last year for me was actually the AMD FirePro W4100. With that one, I was able to pick those up for about $20-$30, and they actually was able to play most games, even Fortnite at 1080p low settings, even 720p high settings, and get a good gaming experience. So that was always pretty nice. And then I would tell the customer, save up about $300 and we'll definitely hunt you down something better. And typically for about $200, we found a GTX 970. But now I need another option, primarily because, well, graphics cards are still harder to come by, and the prediction of the end of 2022 and 2023, we got to find another option, and we still got to be able to build computers for the $300 price range. So this is what I come up with. APUs. Ryzen has their APUs. They have the 2400G, the Ryzen 5, the Ryzen 3 2200G, and right now the Ryzen 3 2200G is going for about $60 to $70 on eBay. Pair it up with a decent motherboard like a A320M motherboard or anything like that, and you have a pretty decent system for gaming. So how decent is it? Now this is a motherboard, for example, which you got VGA and you got HDMI, and some of them have this DVI port, but you can actually run two monitors on these, which is pretty ideal if you're trying to get into your streaming setup. But if you couple it with a decent amount of memory, DDR4 in this case for the Ryzen 3 2200, this is not one, this is obviously Intel, but with at least 16 gigs of DDR4, we can actually allocate max memory specs to the APU and still have enough to actually run Windows. So I would recommend starting off with 16 gigs of DDR4 for these Ryzen setups. Now, as I take a look at possibly the hero for this year, and this is probably the way I might be going with some of my future builds, this is the Ryzen 3 2200G. And let's just talk about a couple of specs on it. The frequency is 3.5 gigahertz. You got 4 cores, turbos up to 3.7. That's not too bad. Released back in February 2018, so it's still pretty new and you have plenty of support on it. And it has Vega 8 graphics. Now with the Vega 8 graphics that's integrated into these CPUs, you get about 1100 megahertz frequency. The base clock on them is 300 megahertz. So you do have enough power. The TDP is low for these, and they're enough to tinkle your fancy, and that's the best way I could compare it. And the equivalent for NVIDIA would be probably about a 1050 Ti, which I still think those graphics cards are pretty good. I'll post a link to a review that I did on the 1050 Ti. That's always been my go-to. So possibly this Ryzen 3 2200G could be what we need to kind of help us keep to that $300 price point. Now, looking on eBay, you're going to pay some ridiculous prices for these. I've actually seen these go for about $150. And the reason why you're going to pay ridiculous prices is because people like to scam people. And they feel that, hey, this is a graphics card. This is the way somebody's going to get into gaming. So I'm just going to overcharge them because of the value on it. That's just my opinion on that. But if you get on Facebook Marketplace or even some of the other social media platforms, I've actually seen these CPUs going for about $60 to $80. And typically they'll include a budget-friendly motherboard for it. So we figure about $80 for that. DDR4 memory you could get as cheap as $60. So let's say 80, 60, 140. Pop in an SSD for $20, 180 case power supply. So yeah, we could definitely budget this for about $250 to $300. More so probably for the $250 and only giving us a $50 profit margin. But if we were to upsell it a little bit to about $350 to $400, we still can make a $100 profit on it. So now let's go ahead and let's take a look at some of these gaming performance on this one, and we'll see how they perform, and then we'll talk about it and give my final thoughts on this. So 3 games I typically like to use because number one, those are the ones that people most commonly play and I find to be more relevant, because a lot of these times these computers are just built for younger kids, and the biggest one that still to this day everybody asks is Fortnite. So Fortnite 1080p low settings, 80 frames per second, lows of 50s, which occasional stutters on it, which is not terrible. Our GTA 5, which everybody loves to play GTA 5 for some reason, 1080p low settings, 30 frames per second. That one I don't know, had some issues with that, but 30 frames per second was playable. And Metro 1080p low settings, average 50 frames per second. That was actually pretty enjoyable experience on it. And of course you can play the Call of Duties. Those work pretty decent on it. And the thing is with this is that you're able to play with the combination of 1080p low settings or even 720p high settings. You're still able to get the minimum of 30 frames per second, if not more, and get a good playable experience for your games. So to kind of sum this up, as you can see, we do have another option, APUs. I know years ago APUs was probably the last thing that we ever wanted to think of or consider, but right now this is another option. And for about $300 we can build these computers with APU, get people started, get their feet wet. I've had a lot of customers that we've gone this way and they've enjoyed it, and then 6-7 months later we're able to pick them up a graphics card for about $200 to $300 and even enjoy the experience more. But they still have a good foundation with plenty of memory, solid state drive, a decent motherboard. You know, they're able to get what they need out of the way and then come back later and invest in the GPU, when back in the day we could just buy everything all at once. But it is what it is. You know, right now the used marketplace on social media is the way to go if you're trying to find this. Looking on eBay, they're selling them for outrageous prices, $150 to $160, and you could probably get some of the newer variants like the Ryzen 5s. Just shop around and you'll find one. But if you go in used market like I like to do, you'll definitely be able to find it. So hope this information helps and kind of gives you guys another idea of which way to go when trying to do the used PC hustle. I definitely will be looking out for these APUs and scooping them up anytime I can, because a lot of times a lot of people see that OG, people see the G at the end of these CPUs and they just run away from them when they're actually a good value proposition for getting into gaming. So thanks for watching, and we'll see what we come up with next.